You are obviously here against your will. Totally helpless. Don't know where you're at. Don't know what's going to happen to you. I'm sure that you've already tried to get your wrists and ankles loose. No, you can't.
When we think of history's most notorious criminals, we often think of public figures who practically broadcasted their chaos. But sometimes, the most disturbing individuals are the ones who blend perfectly into the background. For decades, a man in New Mexico lived a quiet life as a States Park mechanic. Neighbors knew him as an ordinary guy who liked to work on electronics, but behind a meticulous facade lay a highly calculated, decades-long criminal timeline. Today, we're looking at David Parker Ray. From his early background and his calculated criminal methods to the brave survivors who brought his network down. David Parker Ray was born on November 6, 1939 in Bella, New Mexico. From the very beginning, his life was unstable. He was raised primarily by his grandfather after his parents split up, and his childhood was marked by a highly volatile and physically abusive home environment. As a teenager, peers described him as unusually quiet and incredibly shy. He struggled socially but found an outlet in mechanical work. After finishing high school, Ray enlisted in the United States Army. He served as a general mechanic and eventually received an honorable discharge. When he returned to civilian life, he settled in the small town of Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. He landed a stable job as a maintenance worker and a mechanic for the New Mexico State Parks Department. For nearly his entire adult life, this was his cover. He was a trusted government employee who knew the local lakes, parks, and desert terrain better than almost anyone. To the public, Ray was an eccentric but harmless handyman. He married, had children, and spent his free time building things in his workshop near Elephant Butte Lake. But beneath this mundane exterior, a dark obsession was growing. Sometime in the 1990s, Ray bought a standard $100,000 semi-truck trailer. He parked it on his property and began modifying it. He spent thousands of dollars soundproofing the walls and equipping the inside with an array of complex surgical tools, wires, and psychological devices. He referred to this trailer as his toy box. What makes this case unique and deeply unsettling is how Ray operated. He didn't just hide his actions from the world, he actively recruited people into his orbit. Over the years, he involved his own daughter, Glenda Jessie Ray, and a succession of partners, including a woman named Cindy Hendy. He even brought in local acquaintances from bars, like a man named Dennis Yancey. Ray treated his crimes like a dark hobby, explicitly referring to his accomplices as his playmates. Ray targeted what criminologists call high-risk victims, mostly transient women, hitchhikers, people struggling with substance abuse, or sex workers. He knew these individuals were less likely to be missed immediately, and if they went to the police later with fragmented memories, their stories might be dismissed. His operation relied on a calculated four-step methodology. First were the staged arrests. Ray frequently used a fake police badge and a fallback story to abduct women. He would approach a target, flash the badge, accuse them of a minor crime like drug possession, and arrest them, placing them in his vehicle under the guise of taking them to jail. Second, the introduction tape. Once inside the soundproof trailer, victims would eventually wake up from a heavy sedation to the sound of a cassette tape playing. Ray recorded this message himself. He delivered it in a calm, completely flat tone. The tape was designed to systematically strip away a victim's hope within the first hour by establishing total control over their environment. He began with a cold greeting.
Welcome. Before we get started, I want to give you some rules and information. First of all, do not yell or scream. This room is totally soundproofed. No one can hear you. No one knows where you are, and no one is looking for you.
Ray used the tape to lay out a rigid protocol of behavior, explicitly telling the victim that their survival depended entirely on passive compliance.
As long as you cooperate and do exactly as you're told, you will not be permanently harmed. If you do not cooperate, things will become very difficult for you. Your comfort and your safety are entirely in your own hands.
He went on to describe the physical setup of the trailer, detailing the locks, the electrical systems, and the restraints to convince the victim that escape was mathematically impossible. He concluded the recording with a stark administrative warning.
Do not try to trick me. Do not try to fight. I have done this many times before, and I know exactly how to handle any situation. Relax, pay attention, and follow the rules.
The goal of this tape wasn't immediate physical violence. It was total psychological breakdown. By the time Ray actually entered the room in person, the tape had already spent an hour convincing the victim that resistance was entirely futile. This led directly into the third step, the confinement, where Ray and his accomplices would hold the victim for days or even weeks inside the trailer. Then came the fourth step, chemical erasure. When Ray decided to release a victim, he spent days tapering them off with a specific cocktail of drugs meant to cause anterograde amnesia, the inability to form new memories. He would drop them off in completely different cities or by remote highways. Several women actually went to New Mexico police in 1990 reporting that they woke up in the desert with severe physical trauma but could only remember a flash of a badge or a man with an old truck. Because of the memory gaps, these cases were tragically treated as unsolved assaults rather than abductions. For decades, Ray's system worked, but it only took a few brave survivors to bring his entire empire down. The turning point came on March 22, 1999. A woman named Cynthia Vigil had been abducted from Albuquerque and held captive inside the trailer for 3 grueling days. On that morning, while Ray was away at his state parks job, Cindy Hendy was left to watch the property. Sensing an opportunity, Cynthia managed to free her hands from her restraints, grabbing a pair of surgical shears from the table to defend herself against Hendy, and fled the trailer into the desert wearing nothing but a metal collar. She ran to a neighboring house, and the resident immediately called the police. When law enforcement arrived, Cynthia led them directly back to Ray's property. Cindy Hendy was arrested on the spot, and David Parker Ray was picked up at his workplace later that day. Following Ray's arrest, the massive news coverage allowed other survivors to finally piece together their own past traumas. Angelica Montano came forward next. She had been abducted by Ray and Cindy outside a local bar in 1998. Angelica was held for several days under heavy sedation before being dropped off on a random street. Seeing the photos of the trailer on the news allowed her to identify it as the exact place she had been kept. Then there was Kelly Garrett. Her case occurred in 1996 and perfectly illustrates Ray's method of chemical amnesia. She was an acquaintance of Ray's daughter, Jessie. After being drugged at a social gathering, Kelly woke up completely naked on the shores of Elephant Butte Lake, suffering from severe hypothermia with almost zero memory of how she got there. It wasn't until 1999, when the FBI released photos of jewelry confiscated from Ray's trailer, that Kelly recognized her own distinct personal items and realized what had happened to her 3 years prior. When the FBI took over the scene, they uncovered a massive collection of women's clothing, jewelry, and personal items stored on the property. Facing a mountain of evidence, Cindy Hendy agreed to testify against Ray in exchange for a lighter sentence. Hendy and other accomplices confessed to the FBI that several women did not survive the trailer, opening up a chilling look into several missing persons cases. Investigators heavily focused on Sylvia Marie Parker, a young mother who vanished in 1997. She was an acquaintance of Ray's daughter. Accomplice Dennis Yancey eventually admitted to police that Sylvia was kept in the trailer and that he took her life under Ray's direct orders. Yancey led police to a disposal site, but the remains were missing. Investigators believe Ray went back later to move the body. Another key case was Jill Suzanne Troya, a 22-year-old woman last seen arguing with Ray's daughter Jessie at a restaurant in 1995. Jessie later admitted they left together to go to the reservoir, and Jill was never seen again. In Ray's personal journals, investigators found a highly detailed account of a woman matching Jill's exact description. And finally, Billy Ray Bowers, a used car businessman who vanished in Phoenix in 1988 after a series of fierce work disputes with Ray. An unidentified body was found a year later near Elephant Butte Lake, but wasn't until March 1999, the exact month Ray was arrested, that dental records identified the body as Bowers. Cindy Hendy later confessed that Ray openly bragged about eliminating Bowers over their dispute. In 2001, David Parker Ray went to trial. Because of the complexity of the jurisdictions and the number of charges, the legal process was intense. Backed by the testimonies of Cynthia Vigil, Angelica Montano, Kelly Garrett, and Cindy Hendy, he was ultimately convicted of numerous counts of kidnapping, extortion, and torture. The judge sentenced Ray to a staggering 224 years in prison, ensuring he would never see freedom again. His daughter Jessie was also convicted for her role in the kidnappings. However, the full extent of his crimes remains a mystery. While Ray boasted to accomplices and wrote in journals about killing up to 60 victims, he was never legally convicted of a single murder because he carefully hid or disposed of evidence. And because of his use of memory-erasing drugs, no bodies were ever officially recovered or directly linked to him by the time of his trial. Ray's time behind bars was short. On May 28, 2002, just a year into his sentence, and right before a scheduled interrogation with the FBI regarding missing persons, 62-year-old David Parker Ray suffered a fatal heart attack at the Lake County Correctional Facility. He took the true scope of his timeline with him to the grave. The story of David Parker Ray is a stark reminder of how dark shadows can be hidden in plain sight. For 40 years, he maintained a normal job, raised a family, and worked for the state, all while harboring a terrifying secret life. It was only through the sheer bravery and quick thinking of Cynthia Vigil and the voices of the survivors who followed her that his timeline was permanently brought to a halt.